You would acknowledge that you just added to the debt and to the deficit with this tremendous...
No, I would not acknowledge that. We reduced the deficit.
The spending and tax bill that just passed.
Correct.
And you lifted the debt ceiling.
The debt ceiling is an extension of the cap on what's needed to pay your previous bills. In terms of the bill itself, it is $400 billion in deficit reduction, $1.5 trillion in mandatory savings reforms, the biggest we've seen in history.
Look at Margaret right here. This is the face you make when you try to play a numbers and statistics game with one of Trump's top numbers and statistics guys. It's Sean Daniel here, and my Sunday would not be complete without watching a Margaret Brennan video where she gets owned and humiliated by another Trump calm guy. It's Sean Daniel here, and I don't know why Margaret Brennan loves to have on and get owned by all these calm, measured, statistical, thinking Trump guys, but she has it happen almost every week, and I hope you guys enjoy this one.
We begin today with the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much to get to with you. Let's start on what's going on with the Federal Reserve. If you take the president at his word, he does not intend to fire the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, though he's still criticizing him. What is the president seeking in a successor when his term ends in May 2026?
Well, I think he's looking for a chairman that's not continually too late to the developments in the economic marketplace. And I think what we've seen with Chairman Powell, he was very late in the Biden administration to raise rates, to articulate the concern with regard to the Biden administration spending. We all knew on the outside, even Larry Summers knew that we were going to have an issue with regard to inflation. And we saw, recent historical inflationary levels that we hadn't seen before. And now he is too late to lower inflation rates. And so that is the kind of thing that we want to see in the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. And one of the reasons why is...
More of a focus on inflation?
Want an ability to recognize the developments in the economic marketplace. In this case, we want to be able to see lower rates and to have an ability to get the economy going. And one of the things we saw with Powell is that one of the reasons he was so late was because he didn't understand that inflation is largely a monetary phenomenon. He kept saying that inflation was transitory. He didn't tackle the problem. And now he's, again, too late. And you marry that with fiscal mismanagement at the Fed, it's a huge problem that we're trying to raise the country's awareness level with.
But as you know, the Fed is structured in a way where he doesn't have unilateral control. There's a governing board, others weigh in. You did work on Project 2025, and we went back and looked at what they said in there about the Fed. As people may know, that's a Heritage Foundation product that got a lot of scrutiny during the campaign. The chapter on the Fed called for Congress to overhaul the Fed's focus and powers. Is that what you're looking to do in 2026?
I don't even know what that chapter says. All I know that in terms of the president has run on an agenda. He's been very clear about that. All that we are doing is in this administration is implementing his agenda.
You don't want to overhaul the Fed?
We want an economic system that works for the American people. That includes the Fed, and the president has been very clear that all he's asking from the Fed is lower interest rates because he thinks that it's important.
Keep in mind that the U.S. federal interest rates is at 4.2 to 4.5% right now, while in Europe it is between 2%, 2.15%, and 2.4%, almost half of our interest rates. And if you recognize that, and you recognize the way we're getting ripped off, you might be looking like Margaret over here, pretty irritated. And this is why Trump's guy and Trump's administration and Trump himself are talking about some of the mismanagement that the Fed is doing about one thing. Why do we have federal interest rates at 2 times the interest rates, which are based on inflation and other things, compared to Europe? 2 times. And yet we are the consumer economy of the world. We are the powerhouse. What is going on?
because some of the funds that do expire in September have also been held up on the health front. Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, 13 other Republicans came out with a letter saying that you've been slow in releasing funds for the National Institute of Health for research into cardiovascular disease, cancer. Are those funds going to be released?
Again, we're going through the same process with the NIH that we did with the education.
But there's a
$2 million for injecting dogs with cocaine that the NIH spent money on, $75,000 for Harvard to study blowing lizards off of trees with leaf blowers. That's the kind of waste that we've seen at the NIH, and that's not even getting to the extent to which the NIH was weaponized against the American people over the last several years with regard to funding gain-of-function research that caused the pandemic. We have an agency that needs dramatic overhaul. Thankfully, we have a great new head of it, but we're going to have to go line by line to make sure the NIH is funded.
Are you going to
properly.
release the cancer funding research and the
We're going to continue to go to the same process that we have gone through with regard to the Department of Education at every one of these agencies.
Before September, that money will be released?
And we will release that funding when we are done with that review.
That doesn't sound like an erroneous idea at all. But Margaret has a problem with that. The liberals will have a problem with that. If there has been repeated offenses of misuse of money into ridiculous ends, the liberal media is going to try to emotionalize it and say, well, you can't hold up funds for cancer research, for heart disease research. Like holding up funding for some research is going to halt a cure being found if we hold up the funding for a month. Give me a break. We know, and we can imagine, we don't know, we can imagine that a lot of this money that goes into pharmaceutical researches and stuff, as we've seen by what this guy just said, sometimes doesn't go to the greatest ends. And if she's honest, she would just say, okay, maybe a month, 2-month delay. That's not going to kill anybody. It's just going into these research funds where scientists can sit in the back and do all these researches and trials and stuff. I love what he's saying.
Because, as you know, there's concern that you're withholding the money, hoping it just won't be spent. I mean, if you look at the White House budget, it does call for a 26% cut to HHS, $18 billion cut to NIH. Is this just a backdoor way to make those cuts happen?
Well, I don't want to speak to any specific program with regard to what we might do with regard to rescissions throughout the end of this fiscal year, but we certainly recognize that we have the ability and the executive tools to fund less than what Congress appropriated and to use the tools that the Impoundment Control Act, a law that we're not entirely thrilled with, gives us to send up rescissions towards the end of the fiscal year.
So just for our viewers, the Impoundment Control Act is the legal mechanism for the president to use to delay or avoid spending funds appropriated by Congress. Democrats think you want to have an argument over the power of the person who holds it. Do you want that to go to the Supreme Court?
Well, look, for 200 years, presidents had the ability to spend less than the congressional appropriations. No one would ever dispute, and our founders didn't dispute, that Congress has the ability to set the appropriation ceiling. But 200 years of presidents, up until the 1970s, had the ability to spend less if they could find efficiencies or if they could find waste that an agency was doing.
That sounds like a yes.
We lost that ability in the 1970s. The president ran on restoring that funding authority to the presidency, and it's vital. If you look at when we started to lose control fiscally, it was right around the time of the 1970s.
Well, many senators, Republican senators, are very uncomfortable with the tactics that you are using. Senators Murkowski, Senators Collins, that chair of the Appropriations Committee that is really running this funding process.
And you know who else is uncomfortable with this idea of Trump using some more power and restoring more power to him so he can spend less than what Congress wants him to spend? One of those guys with his signature right here, Mitch McConnell. Another guy, Lindsey Graham up here, who we know, who we think are just great MAGA, not establishment rhinos at all, right? I always like to pay attention to that. Who is against an idea and who is for it? And a lot of times that can give me Tom Tillis as well. Oh my God, I didn't even see it at the bottom. I'll try not to move my cursor. Bottom left-hand side. Tom Tillis as well.
And Senator Collins said you're pushing the limits of what the executive can do without the consent of the legislative branch. You need to work with her to get your budget through. And in fact, you need to also be able to get Democrats on board to get to that 60-vote threshold to pass any kind of government funding to avoid a government shutdown at the end of September.
I have a great relationship with Senator Collins. I appreciate the work she does. She is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, so obviously we're going to have differences of opinion as to the extent to which these tools should be used. I mean, she had concerns with the rescissions package. The rescissions package was a vote that Congress had to make these cuts permanent.
On a party line vote. She says, you want to go do these clawbacks, you do it through regular order, and you can put rescissions
but that
into an
was, in fact,
package.
under regular order. That's the challenge, is the appropriators want to use all the rescissions, they want to put them in their bills, and then they want to spend higher on other programs. We're $37 trillion in debt, Margaret. We actually need to reduce the deficit and have a dollar of cut go to a dollar of deficit reduction. That's not what the appropriators want, and it's not news that the Trump administration is going to bring a paradigm shift to this town in terms of the business of spending.
You would acknowledge that you just added to the debt and to the deficit with this tremendous...
No, I would not acknowledge that. We reduced the deficit.
The spending and tax bill that just passed.
Correct.
And you lifted the debt ceiling.
The debt ceiling is an extension of the cap on what's needed to pay your previous bills. In terms of the bill itself, it is $400 billion in deficit reduction, $1.5 trillion in mandatory savings reforms, the biggest we've seen in history.
You said a few weeks ago that the appropriations process needs to be less bipartisan. You only have 53 Republicans. You do need Democrats to get on board here. Is saying something like that intended to undermine negotiations? Do you actually want a government shutdown?
No, of course not. We want to extend the funding at the end of this fiscal year. We understand from a math perspective we're going to need Democrats to do that.
So what does less bipartisan
Well,
mean?
Margaret, the whole week the Democrats were making the argument that if you passed the rescissions bill, that you were undermining the bipartisan appropriations process. So if Brian Schatz and every other appropriator is making that argument for a week,
of the Senate
making that argument, you have to be able to respond and say, if you're going to call a rescissions package that you told us during the months of January and February that we should use to do less spending, if you're going to say that is undermining the bipartisan appropriations process, then maybe we should have a conversation about that. That is all it was meant to convey.
But the alternative to this process is another continuing resolution, these stopgap measures. Are you open to that? Because that would lock in Biden-era funding. What is your alternative here? If you want a less bipartisan process, how do you solve for this? Because it sounds like you're laying the predicate for a shutdown. We
are not laying the predicate for a shutdown. We are laying the predicate for the fact that the only thing that has worked in this town, the appropriations process is broken. It leads to omnibus bills. We want to prevent an omnibus bill, and all options are on the table to be able to do that.
I didn't understand all the stuff he was explaining, but I did understand, and you guys can educate me down below to give me more insight on that, but I did understand why they want less omnibus bills. An omnibus bill is basically where they throw a bunch of these things into this bill and get it all to pass in one big bill so that all these little things can get thrown in there without really the attention of the media and even sometimes the Congress people who actually pass it, without their awareness of what's thrown in there. They put a lot of big, nice, quality things in the bill, possibly like the big, beautiful bill had. But then there's all this shady stuff thrown in there where they throw it all in one bill versus passing it as individual acts. And I liked a lot of what he said, especially about Trump trying to instill some of the powers he has to spend less than what Congress wants him to spend, and the right that Trump has to call out the Federal Reserve because we have twice the interest rates, double the interest rates of the EU. It's Sean Daniel here. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see another video where a smug Karen from MSNBC gets owned, check out this video right here. Kristen Welker is the worst, and Mike Johnson did pretty good for most of the interview. I'll see you in the next one.